The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital corridors as Sarah Martinez walked through the automatic doors of St. Mary's Medical Center for the first time as a registered nurse. Her crisp white uniform felt foreign after years of desert camouflage, and the familiar weight of her stethoscope around her neck provided little comfort against the butterflies dancing in her stomach. At 28, she looked younger than her years, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and kind brown eyes that held depths most people never noticed. The orientation packet felt heavy in her hands as she made her way to the nurse's station on the third floor. Emergency medicine had always called to her, even during her darkest moments overseas. There was something about the split-second decisions, the rush of adrenaline, and the opportunity to save lives that felt like home. But this was different from the field hospitals she knew so well. Here, there were no incoming mortars, no dust storms, and no constant threat of attack. "You must be our new nurse," called out a cheerful voice from behind the station. A middle-aged woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes stood up, extending her hand. "I'm Janet Rodriguez, charge nurse for this shift. Welcome to the chaos." Sarah shook her hand, grateful for the warm greeting. "Sarah Martinez. Thank you for having me. Former military?" Janet asked, noting Sarah's posture and the way she scanned the room upon entering. "Army medic. Just finished nursing school through the VA program." Janet nodded knowingly. "We get a few veterans here. They always make the best nurses. Come on, let me show you around before the real excitement starts." The emergency department buzzed with controlled energy. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, doctors consulted charts on rolling computers, and the steady beep of monitors created a familiar symphony Sarah remembered from her combat days. But everything was cleaner here, more organized, with proper equipment and unlimited supplies. "This is Trauma Bay 1, Janet explained, gesturing to a large room filled with monitors and medical equipment. "We handle everything from car accidents to heart attacks. Sometimes it gets pretty intense, but nothing you can't handle, I'm sure." Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her gloves. The latex felt strange against her skin, different from the tactical gloves she'd worn for so many years. These were meant for healing, not for handling weapons or dragging wounded soldiers to safety. "Your first patient is in room 7, Janet continued, leading the way down the hall. Mrs. Peterson, 73 years old, came in with chest pains. Nothing too complicated, but Dr. Williams wants someone to monitor her vitals and keep her comfortable while we wait for test results." Room 7 was quiet except for the soft beeping of the heart monitor. Mrs. Peterson lay propped up in bed, her silver hair spread across the pillow like a halo. She looked frail and worried, her thin fingers clutching a small purse as if it might anchor her to something familiar. "Hello, Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said softly, approaching the bed with practiced calm. "I'm Sarah, your nurse for today. How are you feeling?" The elderly woman's eyes brightened at Sarah's gentle tone. "Oh, hello dear. I'm feeling much better, actually. I think I might have just had some indigestion. I told my daughter it was nothing, but she insisted on bringing me in." Sarah smiled, checking the monitors and noting the woman's stable vital signs. "It's always better to be safe. Your daughter loves you and wants to make sure you're okay. That's what family does." As she reached for Mrs. Peterson's wrist to check her pulse manually, Sarah caught the older woman staring at her hands. The gloves couldn't completely hide the scars that traced across her knuckles and up her forearms, remnants of shrapnel wounds and burns from her time overseas. "Those look like they have stories to tell," Mrs. Peterson said gently. Sarah quickly pulled her sleeves down and busied herself with the blood pressure cuff. "Just old injuries. Nothing important." But Mrs. Peterson wasn't fooled. Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, held a knowing look. "My husband was in Vietnam. He had scars too. Different kinds, but scars all the same. He used to say each one was a reminder that he'd survived something that tried to break him." Sarah's hands stilled for a moment. She looked at Mrs. Peterson's kind face and saw understanding there, not pity or curiosity. "Your husband sounds like a wise man." "He was. Took him years to talk about what happened over there, but when he finally did, it helped. Sometimes sharing the load makes it lighter. The blood pressure reading was normal, and Sarah made notes on Mrs. Peterson's chart. The conversation had stirred something inside her, memories she usually kept locked away during working hours. But there was something comforting about this woman's presence, something that felt safe. Nurse Martinez? Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway, a tall man with kind eyes and graying temples. Could I speak with you for a moment? Sarah excused herself and stepped into the hallway, where Dr. Williams waited with Janet. How's she settling in? He asked Janet, though his eyes remained on Sarah. Like she's been here for years, Janet replied. Natural instincts, calm under pressure. Exactly what we need. Dr. Williams nodded. I've reviewed your file, Sarah. Impressive record overseas. 19 combat deployments is no small feat. I'm curious why you chose emergency medicine for your civilian career. Sarah straightened, falling into the professional demeanor that had served her well in the military. I believe my experience treating trauma in high-stress environments translates well to emergency medicine, sir. I'm comfortable making quick decisions and working under pressure. I'm sure you are, he said, his tone gentle rather than challenging. But I'm more interested in why you want to be here. Medicine can be a calling for many reasons. The question caught her off guard. She'd prepared for questions about her qualifications, her experience, even her ability to transition to civilian life. But no one had asked her why she wanted to heal people. During my deployments, I saw a lot of pain, she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. Physical, emotional, psychological. But I also saw how much difference one person could make, how the right care at the right moment could save not just a life, but a future. I want to continue making that difference. Dr. Williams exchanged a look with Janet, and both nodded approvingly. The patients seem to respond well to you already, Janet observed. Mrs. Peterson was smiling when we walked by. That's the first time she's looked relaxed since she arrived. The compliment warmed Sarah more than she expected. In the military, success was measured in missions completed and lives saved under fire. Here, it seemed, success could be as simple as making an elderly woman feel safe during a scary moment. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of new procedures, electronic medical records, and getting familiar with the hospital's systems. Everything was computerized and efficient, a far cry from the handwritten logs and improvised medical care she'd managed in field hospitals. But the core of the work remained the same: assess, treat, comfort, heal. By lunchtime, Sarah felt more confident in her movements through the department. She'd assisted with a minor car accident, helped treat a child's broken arm, and monitored several patients waiting for test results. Each interaction built her comfort level and reminded her why she'd chosen this path. How about we grab some lunch? Janet suggested as the noon rush began to settle. The cafeteria food isn't gourmet, but it's better than MRE's. Sarah laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had all morning. After field rations, hospital food sounds like fine dining. They made their way to the cafeteria, joining the mix of doctors, nurses, and support staff taking their midday break. The conversations around them ranged from case discussions to weekend plans, a normal workplace rhythm that felt both foreign and welcome to Sarah. So what made you choose St. Mary's? Janet asked as they found a quiet table by the windows. The Veterans Placement Program recommended it. They said you have a good track record with military medical personnel transitioning to civilian roles. Janet nodded. We do. There's something about military medical training that translates well to emergency medicine. The ability to stay calm, think quickly, work with limited resources. Plus, veterans understand triage in a way that's hard to teach. Sarah picked at her sandwich, thinking about the differences between triage in a combat zone and triage in a civilian hospital. Both involved making difficult decisions about who needed care most urgently, but here she wouldn't have to factor in enemy fire or limited evacuation windows. Are there other veterans on staff? She asked. A few. Dr. Chen in pediatrics served as a Navy corpsman. Mike in radiology was Army Medical Corps. And Dr. Hassan in surgery did 2 tours as a flight surgeon. You're not alone here. The knowledge that she wasn't the only one making this transition felt reassuring. Sarah had worried about fitting in, about whether her military bearing would seem out of place in a civilian hospital. But Janet's easy acceptance and the presence of other veterans suggested she might find her place here after all. Janet? A young nurse appeared at their table, slightly out of breath. We've got multiple trauma coming in. Car accident with possible fatalities. Dr. Williams wants all hands on deck. Janet was on her feet immediately, and Sarah followed suit, her body responding to the emergency call before her mind fully processed it. This was what she knew, what she'd trained for through hundreds of drills and 19 real-world deployments. Ready for your first real test? Janet asked as they hurried back to the emergency department. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried her through combat situations. But this time, there would be no incoming fire, no need to treat wounds while ducking for cover. This time, she could focus entirely on saving lives. The emergency department transformed as they prepared for the incoming patients. Trauma bays were cleared and prepped, equipment checked and double-checked, teams assembled and briefed. The controlled chaos reminded Sarah of preparing for a mission, and she found herself falling into the rhythm naturally. First ambulance is 2 minutes out, someone called from the radio desk. Adult male, critical condition, possible internal injuries. Sarah pulled on fresh gloves, the latex snapping against her wrists. As she did, she noticed Dr. Williams watching her, assessing her readiness. She met his gaze steadily, the same look she'd given commanding officers before entering hostile territory. You've got this, Janet said quietly, moving to her position beside Trauma Bay 1. The automatic doors burst open as the paramedics rushed in with their first patient, a man in his 40s whose face was pale with shock and pain. Sarah moved into position without conscious thought, her hands already reaching for the equipment she would need. Male, approximately 45, motor vehicle accident, the paramedic reported as they transferred the patient to the hospital gurney. Significant trauma to the chest and abdomen, possible internal bleeding. Vitals stable but dropping. Dr. Williams took charge immediately, calling out orders as he began his examination. Sarah found herself anticipating his needs, handing him instruments before he asked, monitoring vitals, adjusting 4 drips with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this work under much more difficult conditions. Good catch on the blood pressure, Dr. Williams commented as Sarah adjusted the monitor. Keep close watch on that. The familiarity of trauma care flooded back to her as they worked to stabilize the patient. This was what she had done countless times in field hospitals and evacuation zones, though now she had better equipment, more staff, and no one shooting at them. As the patient's condition stabilized and he was prepped for surgery, Dr. Williams pulled off his gloves and turned to Sarah with an expression of impressed approval. Outstanding work, he said simply. You've definitely found your place here. Sarah felt a glow of satisfaction that had nothing to do with military commendations or mission accomplishments. This was different, personal in a way that surprised her. She had helped save a life in her new civilian role, proving to herself that she could make the transition successfully. The rest of the shift passed quickly as they handled 2 more patients from the same accident. By the time Sarah clocked out at 7 o'clock, she felt exhausted but exhilarated. Her first day as a civilian nurse had challenged her in ways she hadn't expected, but it had also shown her that her military experience wasn't just baggage to overcome, it was a strength to build upon. As she walked toward her car in the hospital parking lot, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Mrs. Peterson's words about scars and stories echoed in her mind, along with the feeling of satisfaction she'd experienced during the trauma call. Maybe Janet was right about veterans making the best nurses. Maybe her 19 deployments, with all their challenges and trauma, had prepared her for this new mission. The drive home took her through neighborhoods that still felt unfamiliar after only 2 weeks in the city. But, for the first time since leaving the service, Sarah felt like she might be heading towards something that could become home. The hospital work felt right in a way that nothing had since her discharge, and the acceptance she'd found from Janet and Dr. Williams suggested she might finally have found her place in the civilian world. Her apartment was small and sparsely furnished, still showing signs of her recent transition from military housing. But, as she hung up her stethoscope and changed out of her uniform, Sarah allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic about the future. Today had been just the beginning, but it was a good beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, and new opportunities to make a difference. And, for the first time in months, Sarah found herself looking forward to what came next rather than dwelling on what she'd left behind. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine at St. Mary's Medical Center. The early morning shifts suited her internal clock, still programmed to military time, and she found herself genuinely enjoying the work. The emergency department had become familiar territory, and her colleagues had accepted her as part of the team with surprising warmth. But today felt different from the moment she arrived. There was tension in the air, hushed conversations at the nurse's station, and Janet's usually cheerful demeanor seemed forced. Sarah noticed Dr. Williams speaking quietly with several staff members, his expression serious. "Morning, Sarah," Janet greeted her, but the usual smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "We need to talk before you start your rounds." Sarah followed Janet to the break room, where they could speak privately. The older nurse closed the door and turned to face her with obvious reluctance. "We got some difficult news yesterday evening," Janet began slowly. "There was an incident at the VA hospital across town. A veteran suffering from PTSD had a breakdown during treatment and became violent. 3 staff members were injured before security could contain the situation." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew why Janet was telling her this, could see the concern in the woman's eyes. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the rumors started flying," Janet continued. "Some people are going to be nervous about having veterans on staff for a while. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's human nature." "I understand," Sarah said quietly, though understanding didn't make it hurt less. She'd worried about this kind of reaction, had seen how some civilians viewed veterans with a mixture of fear and pity. "Dr. Williams and I have complete confidence in you," Janet added firmly. "But I wanted to prepare you for any awkwardness you might encounter today." Sarah nodded, straightening her shoulders in a gesture that had become automatic over the years. She'd faced worse than awkward conversations and suspicious looks. She could handle this too. The morning started normally enough, but Sarah could feel the difference in how some staff members interacted with her. Conversation stopped when she approached. Colleagues who had been friendly before now seemed guarded, and she caught more than one person watching her movements with obvious concern. Her first patient was a young woman named Lisa, brought in after a panic attack at her office job. Lisa was about Sarah's age, with short blonde hair and red-rimmed eyes that spoke of recent tears. Her hands shook as she gripped the bedsheets, and her breathing was still irregular despite the oxygen mask. "Hi Lisa, I'm Sarah, your nurse today," she said gently, approaching the bed slowly to avoid startling the anxious woman. "How are you feeling?" "Better, I think," Lisa whispered, her voice muffled by the mask. "This is so embarrassing. I don't know what happened. I was just sitting at my desk, and suddenly, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My heart was racing like I'd run a marathon." Sarah checked Lisa's vital signs, noting that her heart rate was still elevated but improving. Panic attacks can be really scary, especially the first time. "There's nothing embarrassing about seeking help when you need it. Is this what PTSD feels like?" Lisa asked suddenly, her eyes wide with worry. "I keep hearing about veterans having these kinds of episodes. I haven't been to war or anything, but I keep wondering if something's wrong with my mind." Sarah paused in her note-taking, considering how to respond. The question felt loaded given the morning's conversation with Janet, but Lisa's fear was genuine and deserved an honest answer. PTSD can involve panic attacks, yes, but panic attacks have many different causes, Sarah explained carefully. They can be triggered by stress, medical conditions, or sometimes they happen without any clear trigger at all. The important thing is that you're getting help to figure out what's causing yours. "You seem to know a lot about it," Lisa observed, studying Sarah's face. "Are you a specialist or something?" "I have some experience with trauma response," Sarah said diplomatically. But Dr. Martinez will be the one to determine what's causing your symptoms and how best to treat them. Lisa nodded, seeming reassured by Sarah's calm demeanor. As Sarah continued her assessment, she found herself thinking about the similarities between Lisa's panic attack and some of the stress reactions she'd witnessed overseas. The racing heart, the feeling of impending doom, the inability to catch one's breath. Trauma could manifest in so many ways. Sarah? Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Could I see you for a moment when you're finished here? Sarah's heart skipped, wondering if someone had complained about her or if this was related to the VA hospital incident. She finished with Lisa, ensuring the young woman was comfortable and stable, then made her way to Dr. Williams' office. Please, sit, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. How are you settling in? Any concerns or difficulties I should know about? Everything's going well, sir, Sarah replied, though she could hear the slight stiffness in her own voice. I'm comfortable with the procedures and feel like I'm contributing to the team. Dr. Williams leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same thoughtful expression she'd seen during trauma cases. I'm going to be direct with you, Sarah. I heard about the incident at the VA hospital, and I know some staff members are feeling uneasy about veterans in the workplace. Sarah nodded, maintaining eye contact despite her discomfort. Janet briefed me this morning. Good. I want you to know that my opinion of you hasn't changed, and neither has my confidence in your abilities. But I also want to make sure you feel supported during what might be a difficult period. I appreciate that, sir. I've been thinking about your background and the value you bring to our team, he continued. Your experience with trauma, both treating it and understanding it from a personal perspective, makes you uniquely qualified to help certain patients. I'd like to discuss expanding your role to include patients dealing with anxiety disorders, PTSD, and trauma-related conditions. Sarah blinked in surprise. She'd expected criticism or worse, not an offer to take on additional responsibilities. I've seen how you interact with patients who are frightened or anxious, Dr. Williams explained. You have a calming presence that comes from understanding what it feels like to be in crisis. That's not something we can teach in nursing school. I'm interested, Sarah said slowly, but I want to be honest about my limitations. I'm not a mental health professional, and I have my own experiences to work through. Of course. This wouldn't replace proper psychiatric care, but rather complement it. Sometimes patients need to see that someone understands their experience before they can trust the treatment process. As they discussed the details of what this expanded role might look like, Sarah felt a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced since starting at the hospital. This could be a way to use her military experience positively, to help people who were struggling with the invisible wounds that didn't show up on X-rays or blood tests. When she returned to the floor, Sarah found herself looking at patients differently. The man in room 3 who seemed agitated and couldn't sit still, was he dealing with anxiety? The woman in room 6 who flinched every time someone approached too quickly, could she have a trauma history? You look thoughtful, Janet observed as they worked side by side preparing medication. Good meeting with Dr. Williams? Very good, actually. He wants to expand my role to work with trauma patients. Janet smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her all day. That makes perfect sense. You have something the rest of us don't, the ability to say I understand and really mean it. The afternoon brought a case that would test this new perspective. A young man named Marcus, barely 19 and still wearing his army fatigues, was brought in by his girlfriend after what she described as a complete meltdown at a restaurant. He just started shaking and couldn't stop, the girlfriend explained to the triage nurse. Then, he got angry and started yelling about explosions. People were staring, and he got more upset. I didn't know what else to do. Sarah volunteered to be Marcus's primary nurse, sensing that his situation might be exactly what Dr. Williams had been talking about. When she entered his room, she found him sitting rigidly on the edge of the bed, his hands clenched into fists and his eyes scanning the room constantly as if looking for threats. Soldier, she said quietly, using a tone she'd learned in the military, firm but respectful. Marcus's eyes snapped to her, and she saw recognition there. He noticed her posture, the way she carried herself, the professional calm that marked someone with military experience. "Ma'am," he replied automatically, his training kicking in despite his obvious distress. "At ease," Sarah said gently. "I'm Nurse Martinez." "What unit?" "3rd Infantry Division, ma'am." "Just back from Afghanistan." Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. "How long have you been home?" 6 weeks. His voice was barely above a whisper. "It's supposed to get easier, but it's not. Everything's too loud, too fast, too much." Sarah checked his vital signs, noting the elevated heart rate and blood pressure that indicated his body was still in fight or flight mode. "What triggered the episode today?" Marcus looked embarrassed. "Stupid thing. We were at this restaurant, and the kitchen door slammed. Sounded just like a mortar round hitting near the FOB. I hit the deck, started yelling at Sarah, my girlfriend, to take cover. Made a complete fool of myself." "You didn't make a fool of yourself," Sarah said firmly. "Your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do, protect you from danger. The problem is that it's still on high alert even though you're home safe." "How do you know?" Marcus asked, studying her face intently. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. She rolled up her sleeve slightly, revealing the edge of one of her scars. 19 deployments. "I know because I've been where you are." Marcus's entire posture changed. The rigid military bearing remained, but the desperate isolation in his eyes began to fade. "You made it through?" "I'm making it through," Sarah corrected. "It's a process, not a destination. Some days are better than others, but it does get better if you get help." She spent the next hour with Marcus, talking him through breathing exercises she'd learned in her own therapy, explaining the physiology of trauma responses, and helping him understand that his reactions were normal for someone who'd experienced combat. Most importantly, she helped him see that seeking help wasn't a sign of weakness. "The strongest thing you can do is admit when you need support," she told him. "In combat, you never went anywhere without backup. Why should healing be any different?" By the time Dr. Williams arrived to evaluate Marcus, the young veteran was calmer and more receptive to treatment. He agreed to follow up with the VA's mental health services and accepted a prescription for medication to help manage his anxiety. "Thank you," Marcus said as Sarah prepared his discharge papers. "For the first time since I've been back, someone actually understood." As Sarah watched Marcus leave with his girlfriend, she felt a profound sense of purpose that went beyond medical treatment. This was what Dr. Williams had seen, what Janet had recognized, her ability to bridge the gap between military and civilian worlds, to help veterans navigate the difficult transition she was still making herself. The rest of her shift was busy but routine. Yet Sarah noticed that several colleagues who had seemed distant that morning now approached her with something approaching respect. Word had spread about her work with Marcus, and, apparently her professional handling of a difficult situation had eased some of the concerns raised by the VA hospital incident. "You did good work today," Dr. Williams said as Sarah prepared to leave. "Marcus's girlfriend called to thank us. He's already scheduled his first appointment with the VA Counseling Center." "I'm glad he's getting help," Sarah replied, meaning it. "He's got a good chance if he stays with the treatment." "How about you? Are you staying with your treatment?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't mentioned her own therapy sessions to anyone at the hospital. "Your VA records mentioned ongoing counseling for adjustment issues," Dr. Williams explained gently. "It's part of what makes me confident in your ability to work with trauma patients. You understand the importance of getting help." "Yes, sir. I see someone once a week." "It helps." "Good. This work can be emotionally demanding, and I want to make sure you have the support you need." As Sarah drove home that evening, she thought about the day's events. The morning had started with worry about how her veteran status might affect her job. But, by afternoon, that same status had become an asset, a way to help people that no amount of medical training could have prepared her for. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Heard about your work with the young soldier today. You're exactly where you need to be." Sarah smiled, feeling more settled in her new role than she had since arriving at St. Mary's. She was beginning to understand that her scars, both visible and invisible, weren't just reminders of what she'd survived. They were proof of her strength, tools she could use to help others navigate their own healing journeys. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients who needed her unique combination of medical skill and personal understanding. And, for the first time since leaving the military, Sarah felt truly ready to face whatever came next. 2 months had passed since Sarah's conversation with Dr. Williams about expanding her role, and the change had been remarkable. Word had spread through both the hospital and the local veteran community about the nurse who truly understood what combat veterans were going through. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial liaison between the emergency department and the many veterans who came through their doors. Today was different, though. Today was the day she had been both anticipating and dreading, her first group therapy session for medical professionals dealing with combat-related PTSD. Dr. Williams had suggested it, and Sarah had finally worked up the courage to attend. The session was held in a small conference room at the VA hospital across town. As Sarah parked her car, she noticed several other vehicles in the lot, and she wondered which of the people inside might be attending the same meeting. Her hands were sweaty as she walked toward the building, and she had to remind herself of the advice she gave her patients: seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. The conference room held about 12 people when Sarah arrived. Some wore scrubs, others were in civilian clothes, and a few still wore military uniforms. She recognized Dr. Chun from pediatrics at her own hospital, and was surprised to see Dr. Hassan from surgery. She wasn't the only one carrying invisible wounds. "Welcome, everyone," said Dr. Patricia Foster, the therapist leading the group. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm presence that immediately put Sarah at ease. "We have some new faces today, which is wonderful. This is a safe space where we can share our experiences without judgment." The session began with introductions. Sarah learned that the group included a former Navy corpsman now working as a physician's assistant, an Air Force medic who had transitioned to radiology, and several others who had served in medical roles during various conflicts. Each person shared briefly about their service and what had brought them to the group. When it was Sarah's turn, she felt her throat tighten. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Emergency Department. I served as an Army medic for 19 deployments over 8 years." The words felt inadequate to describe the complexity of her experience, but it was a start. 19 deployments is significant, Dr. Foster observed gently. "That's a lot of exposure to trauma. What made you decide to join us today?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I've been working with veteran patients at the hospital, helping them deal with anxiety and PTSD symptoms. But I realized that I can't keep helping others heal if I'm not dealing with my own issues honestly." Nods of understanding rippled around the circle. Dr. Chen caught her eye and smiled encouragingly. The discussion that followed was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. These were people who understood not just the trauma of combat, but the specific challenges of being medical personnel in war zones. They talked about the impossible decisions they'd had to make, the patients they couldn't save, and the way civilian medicine felt both overwhelming and insufficient after field conditions. "I still have nightmares about the mass casualty event at Bagram," shared Mike, the former Air Force medic. 27 wounded soldiers came in over 30 minutes. We lost 3 on the table, and I still wake up wondering if I could have saved them. The hardest part for me," added Dr. Hassan, "is the guilt about surviving when so many didn't. I came home to a successful surgical career while some of my colleagues never made it back." Sarah found herself nodding along with their stories, recognizing her own experiences in their words. But, when Dr. Foster turned to her and asked about her most difficult memory, Sarah felt her chest tighten. "I'm not ready to talk about specifics yet," she said honestly. "But I will say that every deployment left marks, and some of those marks run deeper than the physical scars." After the group session, Dr. Chen approached Sarah in the parking lot. "I had no idea you were dealing with this too," he said. "You always seem so composed at the hospital." "That's part of the training, isn't it?" Sarah replied with a rueful smile. We learn to compartmentalize, to function under pressure. But, sometimes the compartments start leaking. If you ever want to talk outside of group, I'm here, Dr. Chen offered. It helps to have someone at work who understands. Driving back to the hospital for her afternoon shift, Sarah felt emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. The group session had been difficult, but it had also shown her that she wasn't alone in her struggle to transition from military to civilian medicine. Her first patient that afternoon was Maria Santos, a 40-year-old woman brought in by her husband after collapsing at work. Maria was conscious but disoriented, and her vital signs were unstable. As Sarah worked to get N4 started, she noticed that Maria kept flinching away from touch and seemed terrified of the medical equipment. "Mrs. Santos, can you tell me what happened before you collapsed?" Sarah asked gently, noting the woman's extreme anxiety. "I don't know," Maria whispered, her eyes darting around the room. "Everything went dark, and when I woke up, I was here. I hate hospitals. I can't be here." Maria's husband, a stocky man with worried eyes, provided more information. "She's been having panic attacks for weeks now. Started right after her brother came back from his third deployment in Syria. He's been staying with us, and he's not doing well." Sarah understood immediately. Secondary trauma was common among family members of veterans, especially when the veteran was struggling with their own mental health issues. "Has your brother been having nightmares or angry outbursts?" Sarah asked Maria directly. Maria nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "He screams in his sleep. Sometimes he throws things or punches walls. I know he can't help it, but I'm scared all the time now. I love him, but I don't know how to help him, and I feel like I'm falling apart." Sarah checked Maria's blood work results on the computer, noting that everything appeared normal from a medical standpoint. This seemed to be a stress-related collapse, possibly brought on by chronic anxiety and sleep deprivation. "Mrs. Santos, what you're experiencing has a name. It's called secondary traumatic stress," Sarah explained as she adjusted Maria's for. "When someone we love is suffering from combat trauma, we can develop trauma symptoms ourselves, even though we weren't directly exposed to combat." "Is that really a thing?" Maria's husband asked. "I thought she was just being overly sensitive." "It's very real," Sarah confirmed. "The good news is that it's treatable for both Maria and her brother. But they need professional help." Sarah spent time with Maria and her husband, explaining the resources available through the VA for both veterans and their families. She gave them contact information for support groups and counseling services, and helped them understand that seeking help was the best thing they could do for the entire family. As she worked with Maria, Sarah found herself thinking about the group session that morning. The therapist had talked about how healing happened in community, how isolation made trauma symptoms worse while connection and support made them better. Maria's family was isolating themselves, trying to handle an overwhelming situation without help. When Dr. Williams stopped by to check on Maria, he pulled Sarah aside. "I see you gave them resource information. Good thinking. How did you know to look for secondary trauma?" "Experience," Sarah said simply. "I've seen how combat stress affects entire families, not just the veteran." "Your work with trauma patients has been exceptional," Dr. Williams said. "I've had 3 families call to specifically thank the hospital for your care. You're making a real difference." The praise warmed Sarah, but it also brought back memories from the group session about survivor's guilt. Here she was, successfully building a new career and helping others, while some of her fellow veterans were still struggling just to get through each day. Later that afternoon, Sarah received a call from Marcus, the young veteran she had treated weeks earlier. He was checking in to let her know that he was doing well with his counseling and wanted to thank her again for her help. "I'm thinking about becoming a peer counselor," Marcus told her over the phone. "My therapist thinks my experience could help other veterans who are just starting treatment. You inspired me to think about turning my struggles into something that could help people." After hanging up, Sarah felt a mix of pride and humility. Marcus was taking control of his healing and finding ways to help others, exactly what she had been doing with her own transition to civilian nursing. The end of her shift brought an unexpected visitor. Janet approached her at the nurse's station with a serious expression that made Sarah worry something was wrong. "I need to tell you something," Janet said, glancing around to make sure they had privacy. "Administration has been reviewing your patient satisfaction scores and clinical performance metrics." Sarah's heart sank. Had she made mistakes she wasn't aware of? Had someone complained about her approach with veteran patients? "Your scores are the highest in the department," Janet continued, a smile breaking across her face. "Patients consistently rate you as excellent, and your clinical skills are top-notch. Dr. Williams has recommended you for a commendation and a pay increase." Sarah stared at Janet in shock. "Seriously? Seriously? You found your calling, Sarah. The hospital is lucky to have you." As Sarah gathered her belongings to leave for the day, she reflected on how much had changed since her first day at St. Mary's. She had gone from being the new nurse with a questionable military background to becoming an integral part of the team, specifically because of that background. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Foster, the group therapist. "Thank you for sharing with the group today. Your honesty helps create a safe space for everyone. See you next week." Sarah smiled as she walked to her car. Next week felt manageable. The group sessions were helping her process her own experiences while her work at the hospital allowed her to use those experiences to help others. She was beginning to understand what healing looked like, not the complete absence of scars, but the ability to use those scars as sources of strength and wisdom. The drive home took her past the VA hospital where the group session had been held that morning. She thought about the other medical professionals in that room, all of them working to heal others while healing themselves. There was something powerful about that parallel journey, the way personal recovery and professional service could support each other. At a red light, Sarah caught herself looking at her hands on the steering wheel. The scars were still there, still visible despite her attempts to hide them with long sleeves and careful positioning. But, somehow, they looked different now. Instead of marks of damage, they were beginning to feel like badges of survival, proof of battles fought and challenges overcome. When she arrived home, Sarah made 2 phone calls. The first was to her own therapist, scheduling an additional session to process what had come up during the group meeting. The second was to her mother, who had been worried about Sarah's transition to civilian life. "I think I'm going to be okay, Mom," Sarah said when her mother answered. "More than okay, actually. I think I'm going to thrive." "What's changed?" her mother asked, and Sarah could hear the relief in her voice. "I've stopped trying to leave my military experience behind and started figuring out how to use it to help people. Turns out my scars have stories worth sharing." That night, Sarah slept better than she had in months. She dreamed not of combat zones and medical emergencies, but of the faces of patients she had helped, colleagues who had become friends, and a future that felt bright with possibility. She was finally beginning to understand that her 19 deployments hadn't been just something to survive, they had been preparation for a life of service that was only just beginning. 6 months had passed since Sarah's first day at St. Mary's Medical Center, and the hospital felt completely different now, or perhaps she was the one who had changed. The emergency department hummed with its usual controlled chaos, but Sarah moved through it with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. Today marked a special milestone. She was being formally recognized for her work with trauma patients and would be leading her first training session for hospital staff on recognizing and treating veterans with PTSD. The morning started with rounds, and Sarah's first patient was someone she had been hoping to see again. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who had noticed her scars on that very first day, was back for a follow-up visit after a minor outpatient procedure. "Oh my goodness, Sarah dear," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed as Sarah entered the room. "I was hoping you would be working today. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm doing very well, Mrs. Peterson," Sarah replied, genuinely happy to see the woman who had offered such kindness during a difficult transition. "How are you feeling after your surgery?" "Much better, thank you. But I want to hear about you. You look different, happier, more settled." Sarah smiled as she checked Mrs. Peterson's vital signs, thinking about how much truth there was in that observation. "I am more settled. I've found my place here, thanks in part to people like you who showed me kindness when I needed it most." Mrs. Peterson patted Sarah's arm gently. I told you those scars had stories to tell. Have you been sharing those stories? I have, actually. I've been working with other veterans who are struggling with the transition to civilian life. Turns out my experiences can help them feel less alone. That's exactly what my husband would have wanted to hear, Mrs. Peterson said with satisfaction. He always believed that our struggles become our strength when we use them to help others. As Sarah finished her assessment, she thought about how prophetic Mrs. Peterson's words had been that first day. The scars that she had tried so hard to hide had indeed become a source of connection and healing, both for herself and for the patients she served. The morning brought a familiar type of case, a young woman named Ashley who had been brought in by campus security after what appeared to be a panic attack during a college lecture. Ashley was 21, a senior studying psychology, and she was embarrassed about the scene she had caused in class. I'm supposed to understand mental health, Ashley said miserably as Sarah helped her get comfortable in the examination room. I'm going to be a therapist someday. I shouldn't be having panic attacks in the middle of abnormal psychology class. Having personal experience with mental health challenges doesn't disqualify you from helping others, Sarah said gently, adjusting Ashley's heart monitor. In fact, it might make you a better therapist. Sometimes the people who help others the most are those who understand struggle from the inside. Ashley looked at Sarah with curious eyes. You sound like you speak from experience. Sarah considered her response carefully. Over the past months, she had learned when and how to share appropriate parts of her story to help patients feel less alone. I've had my own challenges with anxiety and trauma symptoms. Getting help made me better at my job, not worse at it. What kind of trauma? Ashley asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, that's too personal. It's okay. I'm a veteran, 19 combat deployments. I deal with PTSD, and therapy has been crucial for my recovery. But those experiences also help me connect with patients who are struggling. Ashley's entire demeanor changed. You're the nurse everyone talks about. The one who really gets it when veterans come in here. Word about Sarah's work had apparently spread beyond the hospital staff to the community at large. She had become known as someone who understood trauma from both a medical and personal perspective. What triggered your panic attack today? Sarah asked, steering the conversation back to Ashley's care. We were learning about combat-related PTSD, and the professor was describing flashbacks and hypervigilance. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe, and I felt like I was going to die. But I've never been in combat, so I don't understand why I had such a strong reaction. Sarah sat down, recognizing something important in Ashley's story. Trauma doesn't only happen in combat zones. What other difficult experiences have you had? Over the next few minutes, Ashley revealed that she had been in a serious car accident 2 years earlier, one that had killed her best friend while leaving Ashley physically uninjured. She had been driving, and, although the accident wasn't her fault, she carried tremendous guilt about surviving when her friend didn't. That's absolutely a trauma that could cause PTSD symptoms, Sarah explained. Survivor's guilt is real, and learning about combat trauma in class may have triggered your own unprocessed feelings about the accident. You really think I could have PTSD? Even though I wasn't in a war? Trauma is trauma, Sarah said firmly. It doesn't matter if it happened in Afghanistan or on a highway in Ohio. What matters is how it affected you and getting you the help you need to process it. By the time Dr. Williams arrived to examine Ashley, Sarah had already connected her with campus counseling services and provided information about trauma therapy. Ashley left the hospital with a treatment plan and, more importantly, an understanding that her symptoms were valid and treatable. Another successful trauma intervention, Dr. Williams observed as he and Sarah reviewed Ashley's care plan. I have some news for you, actually. The hospital administration wants to formalize your role as our trauma specialist. They're creating a new position, Emergency Department Trauma Liaison, and they want you to apply. Sarah felt her heart race with excitement and nervousness. What would that involve? Specialized training in trauma-informed care, leading educational sessions for staff, developing protocols for veteran and trauma patient care, and serving as the primary nurse for complex trauma cases. It would be a significant step up in responsibility and pay. I'm interested, Sarah said without hesitation. This work has become my calling. That afternoon, Sarah led her first official training session for hospital staff on recognizing and supporting veterans with PTSD. The conference room was packed with nurses, doctors, and support staff, all eager to learn from someone who had both professional expertise and personal experience. Many of you have worked with me over the past 6 months and know that I'm a combat veteran, Sarah began, standing confidently at the front of the room. What you might not know is that I struggled significantly with my transition to civilian life and still work regularly with a therapist to manage my PTSD symptoms. She saw some surprised faces in the audience. Sarah had never been this open about her personal struggles with the entire staff. I'm sharing this because I want you to understand that recovery from trauma is possible, but it requires support, understanding, and professional help. As medical professionals, we're in a unique position to provide that support. Sarah went on to explain the signs of combat-related PTSD, the importance of trauma-informed care, and specific techniques for interacting with veteran patients who might be experiencing hypervigilance, flashbacks, or severe anxiety. She shared success stories from her work with patients like Marcus and Ashley, emphasizing how proper care could change the trajectory of someone's recovery. The most important thing you can do, Sarah concluded, is to meet patients where they are without judgment. Trauma symptoms aren't character flaws or signs of weakness. They're normal responses to abnormal experiences. During the question and answer period, Dr. Chin raised his hand. Sarah, how do you balance helping patients with your own healing process? It was a thoughtful question that Sarah had been wrestling with herself. Honestly, I've found that they support each other. Helping others heal reminds me of how far I've come in my own recovery, and my ongoing therapy work makes me a better caregiver. But I also have to be careful not to overextend myself emotionally. After the training session, several staff members approached Sarah to thank her for her openness and to share their own stories of family members who were veterans or their own struggles with various forms of trauma. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that her story was helping others understand and support trauma survivors better. As her shift ended, Sarah made her way to the parking garage, where she found Marcus waiting by her car. The young veteran she had treated months earlier looked healthy and confident, a far cry from the shaking, hypervigilant soldier who had first come to the emergency department. Marcus! What are you doing here? Sarah asked, pleased to see him. I wanted to catch you after work to tell you something important, he said, grinning widely. I got accepted into the peer counselor training program at the VA, and I start next month. That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I also wanted to give you this, Marcus said, handing her a small wrapped package. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something that represents what you've meant to my recovery. Inside the package was a small silver bracelet with an engraved charm that read "Strength through service." Marcus explained that it was a symbol used by veteran peer counselors to represent the idea that helping others heal helps us heal ourselves. Marcus, this is beautiful, but you didn't need to. Yes, I did, he interrupted gently. You showed me that my military experience wasn't just baggage to overcome, but skills and perspectives that could help other people. You literally saved my life that day. But, more than that, you showed me how to build a life worth living. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she put on the bracelet. The weight of it felt significant, a tangible reminder of the impact she was having through her work. There's something else, Marcus continued. My girlfriend and I are getting married next month, and we want you to be there. You're part of our story now, part of our healing. Will you come? I would be honored, Sarah replied, meaning it completely. As Marcus drove away, Sarah sat in her car for a moment, looking at the bracelet on her wrist. 6 months ago, she had been terrified of anyone noticing her scars, ashamed of the visible reminders of her military service. Now, those same experiences had become the foundation for meaningful work and genuine connections. Her phone buzzed with a text from Janet. Heard your training session was amazing. So proud of how far you've come. You're changing lives, including your own. Another text came from Dr. Foster, her group therapy facilitator. Several group members mentioned being inspired by your progress. Thank you for showing us all what recovery in action looks like. Sarah smiled as she started her car and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients who needed her unique combination of medical expertise and personal understanding. The position of emergency department trauma liaison would require additional training and responsibilities, but she felt ready for the challenge. As she drove through the city she now called home, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. 19 deployments had left their marks on her body and mind, but they had also prepared her for a different kind of service, one that allowed her to heal while helping others heal. The scars were still there, visible reminders of battles fought and challenges overcome. But they no longer represented damage to be hidden. Instead, they had become symbols of survival, sources of strength, and bridges of connection to others who were fighting their own battles. Sarah Martinez, Army veteran turned trauma nurse, had finally found her way home. Not to a place, but to a purpose that honored both where she had been and where she was going. Her story was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of where it might lead. The new nurse who had once tried to hide her gloves had learned that some scars are meant to be shared, that some stories need to be told, and that healing happens not in isolation, but in community. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah looked forward to whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged.